Hello, everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of the Talent Game podcast. It's been almost a year since the last episode, and so we're back with a new season. And the change this season is that I'm doing panel discussions based on a variety of leadership and C-level roles that you'd find in gaming companies. So episode 1, very excited, kick it off episode 1 with two pals. That's Tristan and Robert. We're going to be talking about the role of the studio head and everything about that position today. But before we get into that, I would love it if I could hear some introductions from you both. So kicking off with Tristan, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Amazing. I'm Tristan Rattink, for those listening. And I've got my start in the games industry working on the world's largest children's virtual world called Club Penguin at Disney Interactive back in the day. And after that, I joined a mobile game studio with one of the founders from Club Penguin called Hyper Hippo Entertainment. And there I co-created a mobile game called Adventure Capitalist. And we grew that into a pretty large scale mobile game in the earlier heydays of mobile. And that's really relevant to this podcast because I went from lead producer to executive producer up to head of studio, and that sort of that game and that series of games and that experience sort of changed the trajectory of my career. Since then, I've been GM at Dapper Labs, working on NBA Top Shot, which is one of the world's largest licensed NFT platforms. And most recently, I've been a head of studio and SVP of product at Carbon Counts. And our entire goal there is to create a portfolio of mobile games that tie to real world impact. So the more that players progress and LTV increases in the game, the more trees we plant on their behalf in various projects around the world. And that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thanks so much for that. And Robert, hand over to you.
Yeah. I've been in the industry, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years at this point. My first game was Call of Duty, and was with that franchise for a really long time. And then after I left Infinity Ward, I got my first chance to be a studio head. I had a Nexon backed studio called Robotoki out of Los Angeles, where we were making a massive survival game called Human Element that was incredible, and none of you will ever get to play it. And now I am running a studio called Weatherfoot Games, working on children's properties for an animated kids network called Wendy Weatherfoot. And so they have an animated show, and then just working on a bunch of indie games. I did a lot of stuff in between there. But we'll get to that.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, before we hit record, I was saying that the common thread between the three of us is that we all bonded over our shared love for punk and metal. But I thought that's just an honorable mention. We definitely don't have time to dive into all of that. But yeah. Also, I think between all of those franchises, the two of you must have hit hundreds of millions of players across your career, so that's super cool. And I love as well that you've hit huge franchises at big companies like Disney, and then with Club Penguin and Infinity War with Call of Duty, arguably peak Call of Duty, right? Back then. And then you've also had your share of like startup and 0 to 1 experiences too. Brilliant. So one last thing before we get into it. I'd love to know what you're both playing right now.
Oh man, I can go first. So I am literally in the final form of the boss fight in The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. I don't know if you played Minish Cap. It was a Game Boy Advance game. It was a Capcom Nintendo co-release. I never beat it, right? And I recently decided to start it because I just needed some Zelda in my life. And last night before I headed out, I was fighting the boss fight, but that boss fight has like 4 stages to it.
Yep.
And I think I'm in the final stage, but So probably after this, that's what I will do. I will finish that game. I've already saved Zelda, and now together we are fighting the last boss fight. But I'm doing that, and then when I'm not doing that, I'm trying out the new High Guard, testing it out, and then also playing a little Arc Raiders.
Okay, no, I was what a curveball with the Minish Cap. I completed that game, but I think I completed it about 10 years ago, commuting into London, and I had a GBA emulator on my phone, so I didn't even have the physical buttons. But yeah, that's like right up there with one of the top Zelda games for me. Even though like Ganon isn't the main antagonist in the game, some random wizard guy. But yeah.
I kept thinking the next form was going to be Ganondorf. Like, I'm like, oh, here he comes. It's turning into Nope, not yet.
No. Sorry, I don't know if that's a spoiler. I mean, you're literally right at the end of the game.
I still had one shot that he turned into Ganon.
Yeah, my bad. Yeah. Tristan, how about you?
Right now I'm playing through the Resident Evil series. You mentioned Capcom. I can't believe that those games are playing on my phone. And I'm at Resident Evil 4 right now. Survival horror is probably my favorite genre to play. Loved like the Dead Space games and Evil Within, and live for that genre. And Resident Evil 4 is probably my favorite game of all time. So playing it on the phone right now is absolutely crazy. So yeah, and I'll just as they keep cranking them out on mobile, I will keep trying them out. So I'm really nostalgia chasing right now because that game's 20 years old, and I think I first played it on the GameCube, and the aiming and the controls and how deep that game is, and it just keeps unfolding. You're like, oh, I'm in a castle, this has got to be the end, and then you're like, I'm on an island, this has got to be like, it just, I don't know if you've played Resident Evil 4, but that game just keeps on giving.
Yeah, I have. I don't think I got out of the village though.
Oh yeah, so yeah, no, you're like, I got past the village, it's probably the end, and you're like, no, you're 1/4 of the way through, and you can replay the game again with all of your ammo and upgraded weapons, so you can then just like roll through the game again with a fully upgraded sniper rifle and everything. And so the replay value is just insane because you keep everything, you keep your loadout after you complete everything, so it's unreal.
Well, hats off to you, sir, because I avoid horror in every single medium possible because I've never horror game. Like I downloaded the new Dead Space. Well, I say new, the remastered from a few years back. I got 30 minutes in and I was like, right, well, I'm going to stop playing that game because I am terrified. I don't read horror books or watch the films or anything. I think I like to be.
I do recommend a buddy for like whenever back in the day buy a Dead Space 2 or whatever, it's always like, I'm not going to play this by myself at night. I got to have a friend come over and at least just drink beers and watch me. But anyways, I'm surprised Joe the Metal Guy is scared of horror. That's
I know,
what a paradox.
I even shaved my head recently to make myself look like really tough, but I'm just obviously not. So
keep at it.
So nice. Well, okay, we're 8 minutes into this podcast episode, or so. I should probably get into the bulk of the conversation. So I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you thought that this was going to stay on rails, you were horribly mistaken.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. I was the one asking the question, so that is all my fault so far. Come on. So I'll start off with like, what even is a studio head? Like how? Because I feel like that is such a fairly simple job title, as simple as I mean self-explanatory, you'd think. But in my experience, that the responsibilities under that title can vary wildly by studio size or the type of the product. So I'll throw it to Tristan first. Like,
sure.
What has been your experience of the definition of that role?
Yeah. So for context, I'm usually leading in orbit of 100 to 150 people in a startup when I've had this experience before. So it's encompassed everything from P&L management to portfolio strategy to structuring the team in an operating model that's going to produce the best results, and thinking through both live ops and new precedent product development. We've had first party marketing, publishing, UA. under our roof as well. And so you definitely sort of um, have that within your purview. So the I would say the um, in such a creative industry though, like you wind up operating at these various zoom levels where you're making, long-term roadmap and company strategy and business objective decisions, and figuring out how everything that you're building and working on and all, ladders up into that. But then you're also zooming right in and, playing the games and kind of being a taste tester and a director for what we're working on and why, and what KPIs your executive producers or product managers are focused on. So that's it's hard to describe your day to day because you operate at such varying zoom levels. At least at that size, I think it'd be a lot different if you're in 1,000+ EA, companies like that. It's gonna look very different. But in a like mid-sized studio or startup environment, you wear a ton of hats.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Robert, anything to add to that one here?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always looked at myself and like in my experience, it really depends on where you came up through the ranks, right?
Hmm.
Like I came up through community. And so I've always been a people leader. I'm a team builder, people supporter. And so if I had to distill it down into what my job is to do whatever needs to be done to make your job easier.
Hmm.
So, depending on who I'm talking to, whatever your job is, right? Whatever the makeup of my team is. And that's really where the difference comes in between running a mobile studio or running a AAA studio or running a indie studio or a startup. It's really like what is the demands? In
Hmm.
startup world, your demands are massive because there's too much to do and not enough people to do it.
Yep.
So you generally are very hands-on, especially early on in development and stuff. But as the team grows, and as you start filling in like the necessary positions and as you're getting deeper into production, the role sort of elevates more to just being support for everybody else who's doing stuff. And then generally a lot of high level company strategy stuff like what are we building, why are we building it, and who do we need to partner with in order to execute on that. So it's a lot of like thinking. You get involved in fundraising a lot, especially for me. It's like at the early stage, it's a lot of like, oh well, we have to tell people about this product, and we need to make sure that they know what we're building, why we're building it, and why it matters. So a lot of pitching, but then once we're going, it's really just about helping people.
Hmm.
And like I'm very much a in the weeds type of studio head in the sense of like I'm not trying to do your job for you, but I'm trying to understand everything you're going through every single day so I can more effectively anticipate the problems you're going to face before you face them.
Hmm.
And so it's a lot of forward looking while also needing to balance that with being present in the moment of like, well, what's my team going through right now and how can I help it?
Yeah, brilliant. And yeah, that's pretty interesting. So that Robert, you came from community, and then Tristan, you said you came from production.
Yep.
So yeah, so Tristan, how did you get into that role? Is it just a
Sure.
case of like you stick it out long enough, or is it a case of that there was actually some really purposeful decisions and moves that enabled you to get into that type of role?
Yeah. As I mentioned in my intro, started out as a lead producer and was, fixated sort of on adventure capitalist and porting it to the multiple platforms, running really sound live ops on it, and getting that team in a real operational rhythm so that that game can just sort of continue to iterate and flow sort of on its own. And once I'd led the team and gotten us to that sort of well-oiled state, then I started exploring what the sequel product could look like to Adventure Capitalist. We spun up another pod, and then at that point I was promoted to executive producer. So now I'm sort of overseeing this game that's in live service. Still, running all of the ceremonies, deciding what the quarterly roadmap and the annual plan is, and why, and how we staff and everything. So I was given a lot of autonomy and trust at Hyper Hippo at the time, because they were really looking for people to sort of elevate with this entrepreneurial mindset. They called them game champions, even though, externally I'm lead producer, but they're like, we want you to run this like a little business. Like the leadership team really wanted it to operate like small businesses within a game studio. And there was massive buy-in to the lean startup principles from Eric Ries. So it was sort of like, I want you to feel like you are the owner of this product and have freedom to make decisions and go fast. So then I came to them. Here's the big shift. And for anybody, listening that, or anybody in the industry that's thinking about like, a pathway from product leadership up to, head of studio, I was constantly going to the CEO and the CFO and providing my thoughts on how I thought we should start thinking about, building another game and repurposing our tech stack. And, is this, if we don't start innovating soon, we're going to, naturally in mobile games, there's this long tail and this bit of decay, and we gotta fight that. So I was trying to also wear that hat of like, if I'm in the CEO's shoes or if I'm leading the studio or thinking about company strategy, these are my recommendations and my suggestions from my vantage. And I think the more people can demonstrate that they're thinking about the health of the business, its longevity, and not just fixated on my product. What's the next feature? What's the next live event? How are we going to do this, and this? But if you're doing that 80% of the time, but 20% sort of looking forward and demonstrating that competency, that's what really shifted for me. So when I came to them and said, we can't rest on our haunches. We've got a successful game. That's great, but this is running really well. There's all these learnings and all these things I'd do differently in a sequel game. I'd really love to spin up a pod and see if I can operate both, even though they'll live in two worlds. They'll share a lot of, connective tissue and overlapping tech and learnings. And, we can sort of bake that into the new product. So at that point, I was promoted to executive producer and leading that. And then the second game got off the ground, and player economics were viable, and we were starting to scale UA on it. This was Adventure Communist, and I don't really recommend you build a communism simulator in this day and age. It doesn't have the sex appeal of capitalism, but nonetheless, it was a little bit more leaning mid-core than the more casual adventure capitalist. So we were getting really strong foundational player base. And anyways, got both games to an operating level, and teams running well again. And then it was sort of like, okay, now that we've got two, secure lines of business in the company, what does it look like long term for R&D and rapidly prototyping to figure out what the next game is, and maybe even going outside the genre. We also need to think about like our long term building muscle on both the data side and on the UA side, if we're going to sort of build out this franchise. And so coming to my studio leadership with a plan and saying, I think every time, a business becomes this viable, we spin up another R&D pod. It should just be 4 or 5 people. How do we innovate the genre? What are those unique mechanics we haven't seen? Yada, yada, yada. Also, we got to think long-term about how we're going to, manage our players and create a CRM layer over our data backend. Like, how do we really turn us into like a full-fledged self-sustainable studio? And that's when we sort of got riffing. And at that point, I got elevated to head of studio. And so it was, and similar to how you came up through community, Robert, I was in production, so I couldn't help my lean to like go like want to really craft a really amazing group of producers that were running the product, and as much as I could sort of like you said, you turn into that servant leader, and I wanted to instill the same trust in them while being a massive support, so that they could run their businesses or games as businesses in a more autonomous fashion as well. But like you said, you're at that level where you can sort of lead all of the operations, so you can see around the corners and make sure that any while they're in the weeds looking 1 month out, you can be looking 6 months out and go a little bit deeper into the data, and really think about how, if you've sort of got the right people in the right roles across your group. So anyways, a bit winded, Joe, sorry about that, but
no,
but that was the path, and hopefully there's some tidbits in there about how people ought to think if they want to not just be if they have aspirations greater than just leading a product or a couple of products,
Yeah.
you really got to link those, what's going on in product today, to where the business is trying to go, and make sure that you have, a voice in that, and think about that. And there's a chance that you can come up through product and eventually lead a whole bunch of people and have a crazy
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I feel like hearing that tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like that's probably the most typical, or at least the most the cleanest way to come up into that type of role, in that you started out like owning a small team and a smaller game, and then you've and then eventually you learned things like owning the business side and like the P&L, and
Totally.
ultimately how to run a game as a business, a very small game, and
Yep.
then you've gradually just made that bigger and bigger and bigger,
Totally.
and then eventually you're a studio head. So all of the same skills that you just took on at a manageable, like small level, and then like gradually build that out over time, which is probably that's why I'm saying it's probably the most typical route that you'd find like into a role like that, because it's like, oh,
100%.
I've done this role before, just at a tiny scale, and just over time made it bigger. Is that fair? Is that a fair way to?
I think it's fair, but there's the only distinction is that you shift from being obsessed with product to being obsessed with people and strategy, and I think that's the key thing now, is that you got to create the trust and the framework for people to do their best work and feel like that they can run with it, and they're not constantly trying to get approval, and you want them to feel like they own their product. And I think that's probably, spoiler alert for later, but that's one of the hardest parts, I think, of being a head of studio, when you love making games and you love the creative process, is that you got to learn to let go of that, and trust people to really sort of look after the babies, so to speak. I don't mean the employees, I mean like the game is your baby.
Yeah.
And that's the I would say that was the chasm that was the hardest for me, is because you're applying all this leadership and management to building the product, and you're thinking in features, and you're thinking in KPIs, and you're thinking in what's next, and how do I live service this, and then you kind of flip to be more operational and strategic. And the sad part is that over time you become a little bit detached from the product in a way that that's something that I felt, at least as I progressed. I became more of a businessman than a games creator, so to speak.
Yeah. And I'm about to hand it over to Robert, but another just quick observation on that from the investment side, from the world of gaming venture capital. It's a great distinction there to make between like being obsessed with product to like just pulling your head out of that and thinking about the business as a whole, because the amount of times we speak to gaming product leaders, producers, or creatives, really what we're assessing for is like, could this person not build a game? Can they run a business?
Yes.
And so I just find that really interesting, how that learning curve for you, and distinguish that's exactly ultimately what we look for in business leaders on the investment side.
Amazing.
Hey, Robert, I'll hand over to you. Like, so you've had a different path into this role, right? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Oh, I was born in chaos. The darkness formed me. When I was at Infinity Ward, I don't know if you guys remember how that ended, but Activision had fired our studio heads, Vince and Jason, and chaos reigned, and the meek did not survive. It was a crazy time, and at that point I never even thought about studio leadership. Like, I was happy being the biggest fan of the game on the team, right? Like, when you're in community, that's kind of your job, is like, you're the person who loves the game more than anybody else, right? Like, I play it till 4 a.m. after work. I'm always playing with the community. I'm always in it. And then as I rose up to creative strategist of the Call of Duty franchise, I was sort of looking at more of like, not just it from a fan perspective, but also it as every other perspective, a publisher perspective, a business perspective. How are we growing the franchise? I was getting sucked into more conversations about growth, right? It's like, oh wow, we're like kind of dominating in the US, but we're not dominating in this country overseas. Like, how can we do activations over there? And once I started traveling the world, promoting the game, being the face of the game, doing a lot more investor relations sort of stuff, I sort of saw the bigger picture. So when Activision got did their whole thing, right? There was a lot of like conversation of like, well, who's going to run the studio? They had two interim leaders that came in from the Activision side, Pierce and Ackerman, who came in and were doing their best to sort of right the ship and try to figure out how to continue the franchise. And we had a lot of conversations at that time about me stepping up to being studio head of Infinity Ward. As I had those conversations, I realized that, you know what? I think I do want to run a studio. I don't think I want to run this studio that is owned by Activision, because I realized I wouldn't be able to run it the way that I felt like a studio needed to run. And when I came to that realization, I walked away. I said, you know what? You have now convinced me that I want to do this, but I kind of want to do it on my own terms. And at that point, and you can look back at every interview I gave around that time, I had a real bee in my bonnet about sort of honoring creatives and honoring your team. I was really big on like royalties and making sure like, everything doesn't stay at the top. Like leadership doesn't take huge payouts and then everybody below is struggling for a cost of living. I was really about sharing the wealth, very anti-capitalistic. And I wanted to sort of prove that out with my own studio. And that's why I left, started Robotoki, and became head of studio. So a very untraditional path. I don't think most people are going to get the experience to be the face of $1 billion franchise and then have somebody come in and lob off the top and then this weird power vacuum exists, right? But it was interesting because it sort of forged me in fire and sort of like, which I feel like I needed later in my career to sort of like, raise big amounts of monies and take big swings and try to launch products that on paper might not look like, oh yeah, this is an obvious choice, right? It's what allowed me to sort of like create new things like Humble Games and Humble Monthly when I was VP and head of publishing at Humble Bundle, right? Or when I started the label and did a mobile subscription service and really focused on premium games on mobile. Like that sort of like untraditional experience of like sort of like fight to survive really formed who I was. And it also allowed me to sort of have a tougher outer skin. So much like you as a softy metal fan, you can have a rough exterior, but everybody knows everybody who listens to metal are like teddy bears on the inside. And like, that's sort of what you need to be a studio head, right? Because when you're dealing with outside investors, outside forces, market conditions, like everything telling you how to make your game and how to run your team, you kind of have to have a barrier to that and just really focus on the human element, no pun intended, of the team and the people that you're working with. And so I was sort of thrown into it. I was dragged into leadership kicking and screaming, but I'm glad I did, right? Because it allowed me to sort of have a different perspective on it that I think has made me a better leader than I would have been normally.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love that we've got like such a different take on that as well. But actually, as I was listening to your story there, Robert, like made me think that there was two common threads with your stories actually, and that you both, fairly casually gave examples of where you were given opportunities and you just like took it and ran. So for like Tristan, you're saying, oh, the opportunity where we had this really successful game that I was a producer on. And then it was like, hey, want to try starting a new game team? And you're like, yeah, right, I'll lead on that. And then you just dive in and you just learn everything you have to. And same with you, Robert, right? You're like on the creative side on Call of Duty, and they were like, oh yeah, we need to expand globally. Do you want to help us find activations and find markets, and you're like, yeah, right, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll be the face of this thing. Yeah, I'll go for it. I'm not just saying you're both yes men, but the to the point being that at some point those opportunities were offered to you both, and some people may not have been able to take those on, or whatever would you have it, whether you want to just call it courage or the smarts to see that it was an opportunity. But yeah, that's what struck me there, is that you both had those opportunities, and that you took them, and you just were able to just sponge in all of that learning, because both your explanations of this role is that you are covering everything in the business. It's like, okay, how do you skill up in everything, like, so yeah, I don't know if you agree with that sentiment there.
I agree with it. I just really like the word courage, because things that look like courage in hindsight feel like panic in the moment. It's sort of like, oh, wait, what? We're doing this? Who's doing this? I guess I'll do it. And that is panic, right? But in hindsight, it's like, oh, wow, how courageous of you to step up. It's like, everything would have burned down if I didn't.
Right.
So it's like, I love that sort of like the true nature of it, right? It's like expectations versus reality. It's like, yeah, if you just step up and do things that need to be done, in the future, somebody will call you courageous. But in the moment, you are shitting your pants.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's a fair enough take. But also, I just
don't correct it. Call us courageous. Listen, it doesn't get thrown around a lot, but I don't think hero is too big of a word for us.
No,
I think
that's hilarious.
But you were saying no. It's just you saying like the chaos in Infinity Ward, right? And there would have been people who've been like, right, screw this, I'm out. This is
and
chaos.
a lot of people did.
A lot of people did. So I think the learning there, like, it's like, okay, I'm just going to step up. I'm just going to do it. I'm actually going to build and achieve the thing, right? And so you do that enough times, people notice, be like, oh, whatever I throw at Robert, he's able to do. Maybe I should give him bigger and bigger than it scales that way.
For sure.
Yep.
Maybe. Tristan, what do you think?
I think for me, I was definitely scared, and as every bit of good leadership advice out there, if you're not freaked out a little bit, you're not growing. So there's a little bit of imposter syndrome when you kind of skipped through these levels at a decent clip, which I did. But a large part of the motivation is that Robert, you touched on it. There's having the ability as a head of studio to have an imprint on the culture and how people are treated and how people are compensated and how they learn and grow, and just the fun of taking all of these creative angles and elements. Like whenever people ask me about like why games, I'm like, you literally have every creative art form in the world and you have to melt it down into one recipe and make it all work. So like, I'm a music guy. I'm talking with sound engineers. I love books and movies and stories, and I'm talking with narrative designers. Like, and it's the hardest thing because you're not just like solving a problem or something. You're like trying to find fun and give people escape and joy and community. And so it's like the most difficult challenge. And that, I actually equate that to being a metalhead, not to try to divert us fellas into that direction, but like, I love heavy metal because it's the most complex art form. It's like jazz with distortion, and like it touches on every genre. And so I always want to work, like if I'm writing music, I want to work on the most complicated thing I could possibly write, the most progressive thing. And games is that for me. But the chance to be at a startup and find your footing with a flagship product, and then realize that you can really turn this into a thriving, sustainable business with your fingerprints all over it, and have a hand in how the next games that we build and how we grow the team and how we think about leveling people up and the long-term strategy. I think that was the allure for me in the long run is like, you know, we've got this lightning in a bottle, and we could really turn this into being a part of one of the most epic things that happens in gaming. And I think that's the thing that you're chasing, and you want to make sure that growth and that scale is handled with care and integrity. And that's what I hear in Robert as well. There's this excitement, like you were part of, you know, Joe, you said Call of Duty's like real, like come up, you know, the original Modern Warfares and things like that. And there's some type of magic that's occurring when that starts really spinning up and taking shape and getting legs. And you're like, I don't want this to break. I don't want this to slip through my fingers. So if you need me to do whatever it takes to maintain this, but at a higher level, I'm game, because I think I've, you know, boarded a roller coaster that's going to be a ton of fun and do something really cool and make a mark on a creative industry that I love. So like, what do you need? It's scaring the shit out of me, but like, I don't want this feeling and this opportunity to slip through anybody's hands, and I'll work really hard to maintain that, you know? So anyways.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this
thanks for coming to my TED Talk, everyone.
Well, it's a podcast after all, but
sure.
No, this is a good segue into like, I'm just curious, what do you think success looks like in this role? And the reason why I asked that is because neither of you two are like builders per se.
Sure.
They build the products.
Yep.
And also it can be really nebulous and hard to grasp like a quantifiable value when you're like building teams and nurturing people and and working on broad problems across the entire business. Like, is there ever a point where you're like not sure of the value, or at which point does your value become very evident? You think, oh, I smashed that, or is it only in hindsight that you ever know? So yeah, the shorter version of that question is like, what does success look like in the position? And we'll go with you, Robert.
Yeah, for me, I gauge it based on how my team is feeling, right? It's a daily gauge. I don't look at it holistically, because if I look at it holistically, you know, everything ends at some point, so it feels like a failure in hindsight, you know? But in the moment, you sort of take the wins when you can get them. And so sort of it's like, how healthy was my team at any given moment, right? And so if my team is happy and they don't have blockers and they're sort of feeling good and there's no complaints and everybody's being like well fed and working on stuff that they enjoy, that's what I like, right? If you're getting to performance reviews and people are saying like, oh, I'm burnt out, or I'm like, I don't feel like I care about this thing that I'm working on, or like whatever, that would be a failure, right? That would be like, oh my God, I'm not doing my job, because you being happy doing your job is my job. Like, that is my job. And like, yeah, that means a lot of things. It means like, you know, clearing production blockers, or making sure they're not understaffed, or making sure that we have the funding that where everybody can have peace of mind, right? Because like, if you're in a studio, and we've all been there, if you're in a studio that doesn't have the cash flow and they don't have the runway, like, doing your job is a monumental task, because you're kind of like, the wind is out of your sails. You're like, why am I even doing this? Is this even going to ship? Like, what am I, blah, 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 right? There's all these doubts that come into your head. And so success to me is when all of those doubts do not exist. Those short windows where you're just cooking, right? And stand-ups are exciting. Like in the team meetings, everybody's goofing, having a good time. Like when it's not somber, right? All the times it's not somber is success. As a studio head, I don't try to mix in all the financials or business health, or like, yeah, that's important to the product. But like we've touched on many times, our job as studio head is team. And so all of my metrics of success are team based.
Can I just throw a personal anecdote and a bit of devil's advocate in there? So, well, I will anyway. You can't stop me.
Right. You're bringing studio head energy to this question.
So I was just thinking about, as you explaining that, I've worked in, and I'm not going to name name company names or studios or anything like that. But I remember working in a studio where, and you can see on the HR team the employee feedback, the pulse surveys, how everyone's feeling, and I've seen it where everyone is loving coming to work and it's looking good, but the game and the franchise is failing. And I've been in a scenario where it's completely reversed. The game is like world class, bringing in tons of money. Player sentiment is exceptionally high, but the team are not enjoying themselves at all. And so to come back to you about which obviously which one the head of finance would love to have, right?
Sure.
But you can't help but I'm also a very people focused person, and it's like, you think, which team would I rather be in there? It's a tough one to answer, right? So, or maybe not. But what do you think about that? Like in those two scenarios, based on your definition, which one do you think is a success, or neither a success? Just your thought.
Yeah, you need critical thinking, right? Because what scares me as an industry is if you're making decisions purely on data, right? A lot of the industry from the top down is looking at that data and being like, oh, wow, this really successful franchise and studio is doing great and the team is miserable. I guess we're doing it right, right? How do we replicate that? And so those types of leaders sort of continue forward. I will always sort of weigh in on your success should always be team focused, because the financial stuff is there's a lot more factors at play there. It could be a market condition. It could be a timing thing. It could be a marketing issue. There's a million things that could cause a game's sales to slump or go to a weird period that has nothing to do with the team, right? There are so many amazing teams that have made incredible games that have failed, right? The game failed commercially, but they were great teams and it was a great product. And sometimes those products end up having a second life, right? 10 years later, people rediscover it and it becomes a viral craze because some YouTuber played it and showed how fun it can be, right? And then everybody does it. And so I feel like if you really focus on the team and the now, everything else is solvable. You just need to figure out how do I solve it, right? And that's normally on the publishing side or, the sales side and stuff like that. But as long as you have a happy team, you always have the ability to have a really great game if you solve those other problems. If you don't have a happy team, it becomes really hard to make anything and sort of build your way out of it.
Yeah, I think I really like that. Go on, Tristan. Yeah,
I was going to say, I think there's in the scenario that you painted, Joe, there's definitely on the outside commercially, as Robert put it, that's success. You might have a massive hit game and be making a ton of money. But the thing that if your employees are burnt out or deeply unhappy or discouraged, the thing that you risk the long-term success of that IP, because now you're going to be dealing with retention and turnover issues. And, there's likely an element of the key people that, were responsible for, 50 to 90% of the brain power that went into creating that IP, or the muscle that built that product. If they leave, then you risk, the sequel of that game, or you risk the long-term viability of that turning into a franchise. So if I would found myself as a studio head in that situation, I'd be deeply worried about the team size, because now the product is winning in spite of how the internal scene is being managed. And I think that's vitally important, because you've got a business that fails more than it wins. And there's so many businesses that have come alive in the last 25 years that realize that if you take care of your team and your people and your core, they take care of your customers or players in our case. And if they're happy and empowered and energized every day that they come in, think of what your live ops looks like when you've got an engineer coming up with a monetization feature idea because they're not completely burnt out and just taking another ticket off the heap and executing it, submitting their PR. You want them to come to be invigorated. You want your PMs to be how can we delight players today, or how can we make a little bit more money and really move this needle? And they're thinking in more of a, entrepreneurial bottom up fashion. And if you completely gut that from your company, you've got, the current win and maybe a sequel on the horizon, but where's that IP going to be in 5 years? Where's your studio going to be in 10 years? And then you get the snowball effect of the reputation of friends. Like, it's a small industry at the end of the day that are like, don't work there. I would never go back. I slept under my desk. And that could be like a killing blow. You don't see it in year 1, but you see it in year 10. And then so for me, and why I love, Robert's take on it is maybe to bring this full circle to your question, Joe, like about like what's the success criteria as a studio head. It's very similar, in my opinion, to Robert, but I'll put a bit of a spin on it. The way I like to see it, it is in that, like, I know that games are likely going to fail more often than they're going to succeed. So my job is to get everybody comfortable with that and say, it's about shots on net. It's not about perfection. It's not about polish. It's about constantly giving the audience more things to taste to find out if we're onto something, and try to do that in a quick and efficient manner, and so that we can kill things quickly or double down on things that are working without spending copious amounts of time on the wrong things or in the wrong direction. And the more I can dive into a team stand up over here and here, like I said before, the head of QA's got a feature ID and the team wants to rally around it. Let's put it out Friday and just fucking throw it out there. Like, you hear those sounds on your team and you're like, they feel trusted. Ideas are coming from everybody. They're bought in. They're thinking that it's their money and their budget and they don't want to burn it stupidly. They're calling each other out in a constructive, candor, respectful sort of manner. And that's when those are good signs of a team with high trust that wants to win, and they seem to be having fun doing it because they're all engaged. So that I know that product that they're R&Ding that's going to go to test market is like going to get built well and fast, and they're going to catch a lot of things. And so my job is to coach, like, hey, this might not succeed. This might not hit the KPIs. CPIs might be $10 on Meta. Like it might not work, but I want to keep that operational rhythm and that tenacity flowing on that team. So I got to get them comfortable with how risky this business is. Yeah. But those are the traits that I want to see. And if I see that across multiple teams and pods, and when they come together and play each other's product and critique it and talk about what they love, or join another team's brainstorm, and I'm like, okay, now you're cross-pollinating learnings and you like want to see everybody win. To me, that's the culture that I want to see. And then I know that's my success criteria. Now we're going to put 8 shots on net this year, and 7 of them are going to miss the net entirely. But I believe if I see those traits, the probability of 1 or 2 hitting strong, I like those odds when I see that in the culture that I'm leading.
Yeah, fantastic. And thanks so much for that, Tristan, as well. And hey, I think we're approaching the end of this podcast now. And it's been fascinating hearing both of you talk about your individual career journeys, like how you got into studio head positions, what success, and then what success actually looks like. I think anyone listening to this who is aspiring to be a studio head one day, I think you've given them so many invaluable nuggets of information. And also to anyone who is currently in this role, just to hear takes of people that are at 2 other game studios as well, really invaluable. Moving to the last question that I've asked everybody that has ever been on this podcast. So just to close things out, but I'd love to hear, what are your favorite interview? What is your favorite interview question, or not questions, just the one from each of you? Would either of you like to go first on that?
Yeah, I will. For me, like, it is very intentional. Like, I normally like to ask, what do you need? What's the number one thing you need to do your job better? Right? Because the answer to that is normally very telling to what they care about and what they prioritize. Right? So, like, for me, the answer to that is always transparency. Good or bad, give it to me straight so I can make an informed, educated decision on how to get better or make this better or solve a problem, right? Like without honest, clear, and no bullshit conversation and transparency, I can't do my job, right? And so I ask that from everybody who works with me as well as anybody above me. It's like, give it to me straight, because if you sugarcoat it or you sort of hide the really bad parts, then I can't address the bad parts. They're just going to exist. And so I like to ask that question because it really gives me a lot of insight into what they care about, right? Some people are totally different, right? Like an artist might say, oh, I just need a dark office. Okay. You will work in an office that doesn't have a light bulb, I guess. That's fine, right? But like I just always like it because it really gets to the heart of it. And it also makes them really think internally of like, oh, okay, well, what do I need? Right. And I think if I am going to end up hiring this person, it starts that, you use the term a servant leader, right? It starts that relationship off at the beginning. I'm asking you, how can I help you? Right.
Yeah.
Like, if we work together, I want to make sure it's as good as possible. What does that mean to you? Because it's different for everybody. And you'd be surprised how different it is for everybody of the things they care about and the things they don't care about, right? Because it really speaks to what stresses them out internally. Some people need financial security. Some people could be eating ramen every day and be the happiest ever, right? But they need like a social connection. They need to feel supported emotionally. That question helps me figure out where their sort of mental safe space is. And then that allows me to construct that space for them.
What would you say is a bad answer to that question?
I don't know if there is a bad answer, because the goal isn't the literal answer. The goal is where their heart and thought process is, right? So I don't think, like, even if you're like, you could say like a shallow answer is, oh, I need to make a lot of money. It's like, well, they're not saying I need to be rich. They're saying I need to feel like I'm financially whatever, because there are people who can't work at startups because that sort of financial insecurity weighs so heavily on them that they can't do their job. They're always thinking about like, oh, are we going to shut down? Like, am I going to whatever? And then you have like wildcat cowboys who don't care at all about that. They're like, I'm just here to build, baby. And it's like, cool. Neither one is bad.
Sure.
It's like, I just need to know, because I've talked to engineers who are like, oh, like, tell me about your runway. I'm like, okay, listen.
Yeah.
I have some bad news for you. And then they'll go work at Facebook or Meta or whatever we call it now.
Yeah.
So true. So true. That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for that. So I'm laughing a lot because obviously I spend most of my days with startup founders. So we got that. Yeah, get the whole spectrum, which is great. Also, so hey, Tristan, how about you? What would you say is your favorite interview question?
There's great interview questions that are like, about the craft or situational. But for me, my goal, since I have such limited time with key candidates, is to figure out who they are as a person. So I like early on to give, I like to go through their resume and figure out something that's interesting about them. You'll tend to see something that they volunteer for, or that they do on the side, or they write, or whatever. And I'll usually tailor a question around that. So if they say on their resume, it says, I love cooking, I'll be like, early on in the interview, just to break them out of their, like, sort of more like, I'm prepared, I'm in business mode, I'm with the head of studio, so I can't fuck this up. And they come in kind of rigid sometimes. So you're like, all right, who are you going to dinner with, alive or dead, anybody? And like, what do you love cooking? What are you cooking for them and why? And then you see them light up and you're like, oh, you read my resume. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden you see the passion come out, and you see the person, and you see, and you see this human come out, and it tends to create a degree of like vulnerability and transparency throughout the rest of the interview, I find. So I'll start with a couple of hard balls, and then we'll go here. And it's like, I've got an hour to figure out, like, are we going to work great together? How do you think? Can you catch this curveball I'm throwing you right now? What makes you light up? I need to see the real you, not the like best answers, most polished in an hour. Otherwise, I'm going to go away and be like, they were really well prepared. I don't know if my team's going to love this person. I don't know how passionate they are about building and creating. So usually along those lines. So usually, people are writers and musicians and things like that. And so I'll be like, you could join any band back in the, 70s. You got Beatles, Stones, like Cream, who you joining kind of thing. And anyways, I find that gets people out of their shell. So I tend to do that. But I have a bunch of other stock, amazing, well-worded questions that Adam Grant and Simon Sinek and other people have come up with. But I don't think anybody on this podcast wants to hear the dull stuff.
No, it's great. Both of yours approaches were like, how can I get to the heart of this person as fast as possible?
Exactly. Find their motivations, drag the real them out into this room right now, because they shouldn't be so nervous. And chances are, if they lead with themselves, we'll get a really, really good view of who they are and how they tick.
Nice.
Yeah. That's really great, because you cannot have a team of people masking.
No.
Like, if everybody's walking out pretending to be a professional, like, it's going to be real hard to make games together.
For sure.
You might be able to do some other corporate jobs like that. I don't know. I've never had them. But in a creative space, you kind of need to be as real as possible, as often
nerd out on whatever it is your thing is, and let's get it out. And you're only going to talk to a few people on my team, in 3 to 4 hours of time. And that's such a brief window if you can't crack the thing open, right?
Yeah. And I think that's also what pulls people to the games industry. Like,
for sure.
The amount of entire industries that are built on this masking professional culture.
For sure.
And it's like coming to games. And I I'm not speaking for every game studio, but it's definitely a theme across the entire industry where people just try to show up and be themselves. And create like incredibly complex, fun bits of software. So, hey, Tristan and Robert, it's been a pleasure. I've absolutely loved recording this episode. So, just to say thanks so much for coming on the Talent Game podcast, and see you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Thank you.